Ladies and gentlemen, this is Steve Eyes. You're on the EyesIsWatchin channel. Okay, people, we got a new one. This time, the scam virus, aka Hantavirus, that's out right now. Now, spamming our news feeds as the next big emergency. Of course, Hanta means scam or fake in Hebrew. Yeah, great name for the imaginary virus right here. But also translated from Latin, it's I haunted this country. Or move around the letters a little bit, you also got you've got us. Yeah, the same damn script feels like it's getting dragged back out again. Could it be the next plandemic? Because all of a sudden, Hantavirus is getting blasted across the headlines like the media found its next fear campaign. The timing is what grabs people's attention too. The WHO just finished another global outbreak simulation, and then 1 week later, you got an outbreak on a cruise ship, and now suddenly we're flooded with stories about cruise ship deaths, quarantines, workers in protective gear, and warnings about possible human-to-human spread. Most people barely even knew what Hantavirus was a few weeks ago. Now it's being talked about like the beginning of another worldwide emergency. Fun factoid here, Hantavirus is listed in Pfizer's 38-page document. Page 33, yeah, of course. It's one of the 1,233 listed side effects. Of course it's on page 33, people. You can already feel the same psychological atmosphere building again. The media keeps hammering people with stories about long incubation periods and asymptomatic spread, which instantly creates paranoia because once people believe someone could be carrying something without knowing it, everybody starts to look at each other differently. Airports, crowded places, public transit. People already remember how fast society changed last time. People went completely berserk overnight. People acted like they didn't have brains at all. I know you guys remember these videos right here, okay? Total zombies. And it looks like it's happening again. And of course, the pharmaceutical side shows up almost immediately. Moderna is already tied to hantavirus vaccine development, while the same public health figures from the COVID years suddenly reappear all over television acting like trusted authorities. What makes people uneasy is that none of the infrastructure built during COVID ever disappeared. The system stayed in place for this exact reason. The media playbook stayed in place too, the exact same script. So when another virus suddenly gets pushed this aggressively, right after another pandemic exercise, people immediately start wondering if society is being mentally prepared for another round of fear and restrictions, lockdowns all over again. All of a sudden, CNN is repeating the whole 6 feet apart routine while talking about hantavirus. Like you can catch it from someone simply saying hello to you and passing you by. Okay, this is the same BS we were told about COVID. Simply walking by someone, you can catch it. Apparently now, even standing near another human being for 5 seconds is enough to trigger another public health freakout. Legacy media wasted absolutely no time pushing this one either. Now health experts are suddenly warning the hantavirus could be more contagious than originally thought. Oh, really? Because that's how it always starts, okay? First it's don't panic, then just 2 days later it turns into nonstop speculation about hidden spread and invisible danger floating around everywhere. Okay, remember this, early on in 2020, the WHO said COVID is not something to worry about. It doesn't even transmit from person to person, okay? Because the virus is imaginary, they can make up anything they want every other week. So it turned from that to now it's the most dangerous transmissible virus in history. Just 1 week later. And now we're seeing the same thing with hantavirus. First it's, oh, you can only catch it through rats, okay? Nothing to worry about. And suddenly, actually, this particular variant is the only variant that can transmit between person to person. Well, ain't that some shit? I just think the timing is interesting too, okay? The second 5G started rolling out worldwide back in late 2019. Mysterious illnesses suddenly started popping up everywhere, appearing everywhere at the same time. But the main place was Wuhan, because Wuhan was one of the first major places running full-scale 5G infrastructure, and look what happened right after that, okay? So a lot of that footage we did see early on in Wuhan clearly was scripted theater, or not. Maybe those people were hit with directed energy weapons, 5G beams right to the skull, okay? You never know. Now, this year, they're talking about 6G. Trump is out here talking about technology that can supposedly see inside your skin. Surveillance systems are getting more invasive by the month. And right alongside all that, they suddenly start hammering the public with stories about a virus carrying a 40% kill rate. Interesting tweet right here. Gubba Homestead says 1920, radio rollout. Spanish flu, 1979, 1G rollout. Swine flu, 1991, 2G rollout. Cholera outbreak, 1998, 3G rollout. Then avian flu. 2009, 4G rollout. Swine flu. 2019, 5G rollout, COVID, and 2026, 6G rollout, well, Hantavirus. I think something invisible is making us sick, and it's not a virus, she says. That is a great point right here. It's crazy they pushed the lab leak narrative in early 2020, an engineered virus developed by evil Chinese scientists, a virus that mutates indefinitely, gets deadlier and more transmissible as time goes on. Okay, and people just accepted that till this day. This is just absurd. This narrative was pushed to send shockwaves through the media, scaring people to run and get an injection to save themselves from this deadly virus. Well, it looks like we have a new one here, because look what they're pushing now. Hantavirus vials vanished from Australian lab 2 years before cruise ship outbreak. Over 300 vials, people. And remember, they have a mouse plague affecting crops right now in Australia. Okay, so the narrative and psyop is being set. The foundation is being set, folks. And look who pops up right on time once again. Leanna Wen, Minnie Mao herself. Same exact language from COVID too. Almost like nobody in media has learned a new sentence in 6 years. There may well be more cases that arise, she says. We know the incubation period is long, and are we going to see asymptomatic transmission, she says? More insane quotes here. What if passengers from flights start testing positive? What if family members test positive? That requires careful monitoring. There it is again. Asymptomatic. The true dumbing down of society continues. But I have no symptoms, one says. Well, Dumber says, well, that's one of the symptoms. The people falling for this probably fell for asymptomatic monkeypox too. Yeah, that was a thing they tried to push. They really thought you were dumb enough to accept that one. And remember, this is the same woman who went on television during COVID telling everybody we can't trust the unvaccinated. Like millions of regular people suddenly became dangerous criminals overnight for refusing poisonous injections. People also remember her appearing during the Boston bombing media coverage, claiming she treated multiple bombing victims while saying she feared her husband may have been among them. Then right before COVID exploded worldwide, she conveniently leaves her role as president of Planned Parenthood and suddenly reappears as one of the loudest pro-lockdown, pro-mandate voices all over television almost immediately after. Funny how these people always seem perfectly positioned the second a global crisis begins, kind of like they're puppets that are moved along from here, crisis actor one day, to head of vaccine propaganda the next. It always works like that. And speaking of weird coincidences, the same guy now issuing hantavirus warnings from on board that infected cruise ship has old clips resurfacing online where he was promoting COVID boosters, saying in quotes, "Get vaccinated. Gorgeous vaccinated girls get boosted. Gorgeous boosted girls get boosted again." You seriously can't make this stuff up anymore, okay? The man's name is Jake. And he's now saying, I'm an influencer stuck in hantavirus quarantine. I have complicated feelings about my sudden fame. Yeah, I bet. And let's look at some of the footage here because it's just hilarious. Okay, this is pure theater right here. Footage floating around online where some random guy accidentally walks right through the middle of a hantavirus news segment while they're filming their dramatic little scare shots. And here we have the first victims of hantavirus laying up in the hospital beds, as you can see right here. Looks like the same actors from COVID. Another one here, footage of a hantavirus patient being rushed to a hospital in Atlanta. A poorly acted skit where a t-shirt wearing man, not even sitting in a wheelchair until he enters the frame, handles things with his bare hands too. This is just absurd. Now, how are they testing people for this imaginary hantavirus? Guess, people, guess. Well, we're in the same PCR pandemic, people. During COVID, one of the biggest scams pushed onto the public was the PCR test itself. We were told it was a flawless, gold standard scientific tool that could magically tell you exactly who was sick. But one thing that was never discussed on the MSM was what the PCR even does. It amplifies genetic material. That's it. So it works by amplifying tiny fragments of genetic material over and over again until something becomes detectable. The higher the cycle threshold gets pushed, the easier it becomes to pull weak, meaningless traces into a positive, in quotes, result. Even the inventor of the PCR, Kary Mullis, openly criticized the idea of using PCR as a definitive diagnostic tool for active illness. During COVID, critics kept warning that once you start cranking those amplification cycles high enough, almost anything can start lighting up as a positive. Dead fragments, background contamination, tiny remnants that don't even prove somebody is actually sick. That's one of the reasons the numbers during the pandemic exploded into pure hysteria. I mean, they were all fake, but the PCR turned it all the way up. The testing itself became part of the engine driving the fear. These genetic fragments were never proven to be part of any virus. Why? Because no virus has ever been fully isolated and sequenced by itself, ever.
Virology is a pseudoscience, and the viruses they claim cause disease have never actually been proven to exist. It all started with germ theory. When Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch couldn't find a bacteria for every disease, they didn't question their theory. They invented a scapegoat, an invisible, filterable agent smaller than bacteria. The virus wasn't discovered. It was a concept created to save a failing hypothesis. From the very beginning, its existence was inferred, not proven. When virologists say they isolated a virus, you probably picture them taking a sample from a sick person and separating a pure virus particle. That has never happened. Not once. Here's what they actually do. They take unpurified fluid from a sick person, a mix of mucus, bacteria, human cells, and who knows what else. They don't clean it. Instead, they mix this gunk with toxic antibiotics, animal serum, and then dump it onto a culture of cells, usually from monkey kidneys or aborted human fetuses. They starve and poison these cells for days until they start to break down and die. They call this cell death the cytopathic effect, and they claim it's proof a virus is killing the cells. The resulting toxic soup of dead cells and chemicals is what they call a virus isolate. They never prove a virus was in the sample to begin with. They just assume it, and then use the cell death they created as proof. It's completely circular reasoning. But what about the pictures from the electron microscope? Those famous spiky balls? They take a drop of that same toxic soup, subject it to a destructive chemical process that kills and distorts everything, and then look at the debris under a microscope. They point to a random particle, which is indistinguishable from normal cellular debris or exosomes, and declare, that's the virus. No purification, no proof it came from a person, no proof it's pathogenic. It's just pointing at a dot and telling a story. And the viral genomes? They're created on a computer. They take all the random genetic fragments from that unpurified cell culture soup, human DNA, monkey DNA, bacterial DNA, and use software to stitch together a sequence they think looks like a virus. This digital model is then called the reference genome. It's not from a real purified virus. It's an in silico creation. That's why there are millions of variants for something like SARS-CoV-2. They're just tweaking the computer model. It's a digital phantom, not a biological reality.
Anyone or anything can test positive on a PCR based on amplification cycles, because every damn thing has genetic fragments of every damn thing in them. That's why mangoes and papayas and even river water was testing positive for SARS-CoV-2 a few years back. And remember that ridiculous Antarctica outbreak story from 2022? A Belgian research station in one of the most isolated places on Earth somehow got hit with COVID even though the workers were fully vaccinated, had to test before arriving, and were living at a remote polar base surrounded by ice and penguins. So what are we supposed to believe here? Either PCR testing was picking up meaningless genetic fragments depending on amplification cycles, or this super bioengineered China lab virus threw on a Superman cape, flew thousands of kilometers across a frozen wasteland, broke into a vaccinated Antarctic research station, and found those unlucky bastards hiding at the bottom of the world. That's how absurd this got. Okay, the same virus they said gets rapidly weakened outdoors by sunlight and fresh air. Yeah, that one. Somehow made its way into one of the most isolated stations on Earth. Okay, they weren't lying when they put out that propaganda saying the virus will hunt you down.
If you are unvaccinated and the virus comes into your community, the virus will hunt you out.
I love it.
The virus hunts down the unvaccinated.
The virus will find the unvaccinated. That's what they all say.
And it's a virus that will find you if you're not vaccinated.
If you're unvaccinated, it will find you.
The virus is literally finding unvaccinated people.
It will
Literally.
find the unvaccinated.
We're seeing COVID-19 tracking down unvaccinated people.
You know, if you're unvaccinated and you're in circulation, you're going to get it.
Well, the Delta variant of COVID-19 has the potential to spread through an unvaccinated community like wildfire.
The Delta variant is so aggressive that if you are unvaccinated, it's going to find you.
Delta is finding the unvaccinated.
The Delta variant will find you. If you're not vaccinated, it will find you.
The virus tends to find places that are under-vaccinated.
It does not just move to city centres. It finds the unvaccinated wherever they are.
So you might live in the middle of the desert, but it can still find you.
I love that one. You can be anywhere, people. The middle of the desert. Doesn't matter if you're in Antarctica, hiding in an igloo. It will find you and hunt you down. Do you understand that? Now come here and get your poison death shot. More PCR insanity right here. A suspected hantavirus case has been reported at a high school in New York as the U.S. monitors dozens of potential cases following an outbreak aboard a cruise ship. Ontario County Public Health in Western New York announced an investigation into the suspected case in the county, but it did not reveal details about the patient. Of course, I mean, it's New York. It's like the rat capital of the world. So I think there's going to be a lot more freakouts that will emerge out of New York. Just wait for it. Now, here we are again, people, with hantavirus headlines suddenly everywhere. And what are they already talking about? PCR testing, blood testing, and mass surveillance testing. The same we need to modernize testing pitch all over again. Former White House COVID coordinator, crazy scarf lady Deborah Birx was literally laughing during an interview while talking about expanding hantavirus testing across the population using PCR, saying there could be more human-to-human spread happening than authorities realize. She pushed the idea that schools and universities should start testing too, while claiming we know how to deal with these viruses. We just need to move into the 21st century and make testing more widely available. Anybody paying attention can already hear the same playbook of 2020 happening all over again. First comes the fear campaign, then comes the push for mass testing, then suddenly every sniffle and cough gets fed straight into another giant outbreak tracker, okay, live on TV. That being said, guess who's bozo of the week? Well, I hate to do this to him, but once again, it goes to, drum roll please, Brian Johnson, people, for the second week in a row. Congrats, Brian. So last week, Mr. I Want to Live Forever says he's taken 2 vaccines at the same time for longevity benefits. Yeah, he really said that. This week, he jumps online sounding like he just watched Contagion on mushrooms and acid and starts fantasizing about some AI-powered hantavirus apocalypse. The dude tweets that if hantavirus became a global threat, it would unleash AI plus biotech unlike anything we've ever seen. And then he starts listing this insane sci-fi horror checklist, okay? Genome sequenced in 4 hours, AI screens 10,000 drugs in 24 hours, 50 vaccine candidates simultaneously. And he's actually mentioning this like it's all great news that's going to happen. AI designed antibodies, risk of death computed instantly. Your genome and biomarkers determine your protocol. It's like he's listing the plot points of a future Black Mirror episode. What's crazy is these people start talking about virus genome sequencing like it's some unquestionable holy science after the entire COVID circus. Most people never even looked into how controversial a lot of this became during the pandemic. PCR fraud, virus isolation fraud. Every country was counting deaths differently. In the States, you could get in a car crash and die from COVID. Vaccines being literal poison, all of it. First, they were sold as stopping transmission, then suddenly they didn't stop transmission. Then suddenly everybody needs endless boosters until the end of time. Okay, but somehow Brian Johnson walks away from all of that thinking the solution is even more AI surveillance, more experimental shots, and real-time biometric tracking. And listen to the wording, because this is where it starts sounding dystopian as hell. Your genome plus biomarkers determine your protocol. In other words, every human becomes a walking data profile. So he wants everyone to have their own risk score. Then he says variant maps updated every hour. Every hour, people. These people genuinely want a future where society is being constantly monitored for outbreaks in real time by AI systems. They think that's a cool future. My favorite reply here is, Brian, can you at least vaguely hide how much you're looking forward to this? It's true. This guy's too ecstatic about something like this. Then he casually says, no one would wait for government. Okay, fair enough. I mean, after COVID, a lot of people don't trust governments anymore anyway. But the hilarious part is where Brian Johnson takes that thought next. Because instead of landing on personal freedom, skepticism, or people becoming less dependent on centralized systems, he somehow arrives at trust giant biotech corporations like Moderna and Pfizer. So the problem supposedly isn't centralized control itself, it's just who gets to control it. Government bad, but billion-dollar pharmaceutical companies partnered with AI systems and real-time biometric tracking? Yeah, apparently that's the cool solution now. And the funniest part is, these billionaire biohacker types always act like they're ready to save humanity while sounding completely disconnected from normal human beings. Every problem somehow magically leads back to more surveillance and more injections. They never stop and ask, maybe the reason people lost trust after COVID is because governments, corporations, media, and pharmaceutical companies contradicted themselves for years straight while censoring anyone who questioned anything. But nope, Brian Johnson learned absolutely nothing apparently, because according to him, the future is AI-generated vaccines delivered at warp speed while your genetic profile gets uploaded into a real-time health algorithm. Yeah, totally not creepy at all. Give this man another bozo trophy immediately. And look at the latest cruise ship story here. A French woman aboard the MV Hondius reportedly developed flu-like symptoms, including coughing, but doctors initially brushed it off as anxiety or stress because the symptoms seemed to improve. Then suddenly the story shifts and we're told she tested positive for Hantavirus and her condition deteriorated after being flown back to Paris. Meanwhile, another passenger was described in reports as testing weekly positive, people, before being transferred into a Nebraska biocontainment unit. Weekly positive. The exact kind of wording people heard nonstop during COVID when borderline PCR results started getting treated like confirmed catastrophe cases. The article never even explains what kind of testing was used, what the amplification thresholds were, or how they determined these positives in the first place. None of that nuance makes headlines because all the public is supposed to hear is positive case, critical condition, quarantine, and human-to-human transmission. Dutch hospital workers were even quarantined for handling blood and urine samples without full protective gear. So we're seeing the same testing obsession that suddenly transforms fear into official outbreak statistics overnight. I really wonder how powerful the mind is because due to fear and anxiety, because this woman was told she was just anxious at the beginning. What if the anxiousness itself made her ill or worrying too much? Like, what the hell do they even mean by tested weekly positive? The Department of Health posted this right here. 17 American citizens were airlifted from the cruise ship to the States. 2 were put in the biocontainment unit because one passenger had mild symptoms and another tested mildly positive on a PCR for the Andes virus. The Andes virus being the only hantavirus variant to be transmissible from human to human. So I'm assuming the other person didn't test positive at all. Look at Eric Fiegel-Ding, CCP agent right here, freaking out over this. He's like, there's no such thing as mildly positive. It's just positive, and we need to lock down everyone, okay? Quarantine camps immediately. Mildly positive means deadly positive. That's why he posted this right here. And it looks like the COVID propagandists are back with the hantavirus stuff now. And it looks like you don't even need to test positive at all, apparently, because now they're reporting that a British tourist in his 60s got detained in Italy and locked into a month-long quarantine after simply being on the same flight as one of the cruise ship passengers who later died. The guy had no symptoms whatsoever and even tested negative. But authorities still grabbed him outside a bar in Milan and dragged him off to a hospital anyway. Even crazier, his companion got quarantined too, despite reportedly not even being on the original flight in question. So now we've officially entered the stage where being near someone who was near somebody who maybe tested positive is enough to get you isolated for 42 days. Totally reasonable stuff here. They're saying this British tourist had to sit in a single hospital room until June because he didn't have private accommodations available. Meanwhile, more British citizens connected to the cruise ship are being flown back to the UK as a precaution, despite officials openly admitting none of them are asymptomatic at all. Then you got the WHO stepping in, talking about passengers on ships having mental breakdowns from the stress and isolation, while praising governments for handling the situation with compassion and dignity. Compassion apparently meaning biohazard suits, forced isolation, military buses, infectious disease wards, constant monitoring, and endless PCR testing. Yeah. The media keeps hammering people with phrases like higher risk individuals, special pathogen treatment centers, careful monitoring, and long incubation periods, while also saying there is supposedly no evidence yet of a larger outbreak happening. At the same time, French officials are now warning they still don't fully understand the virus and are waiting on more sequencing data to see if it mutated. There it is again, sequencing. Variants and monitoring, okay? Precautionary isolation. We all know where this language leads because we already watched this entire script unfold a few years ago, almost word for word. And while hantavirus panic suddenly starts filling the headlines again, King Charles comes out announcing digital ID systems are moving forward. Funny timing, right? During COVID, they already told people they needed systems to track who was vaccinated, who tested positive, who could travel, and who needed to quarantine. Now the same language starts showing up again right beside digital identification being rolled out in the background. I like this meme right here. So the bus drivers and the security guards are resistant to the virus. Yeah, funny, right? The same stuff during COVID, people. These memes right here are barely satire at this point. Hantavirus kills 2 in a meth lab explosion. Yeah. And a great one here. Ireland's first victim confirmed. Man whose parachute didn't open dies of hantavirus. That damn hantavirus strikes again. But there are real posts that actually sound just as outrageous, like this one right here. Hantavirus can remain in human semen for up to 6 years and has the potential for sexual transmission even after a person has recovered, according to a peer-reviewed study. Yeah, if you can believe that. Remaining in human semen for 6 years is truly unbelievable. How long before they tell us hantavirus shrinks your penis by 3 inches? I'm assuming soon as they roll out the hantavirus vax, guaranteed. So director of the World Homicide Organization, Dr. Tedros, says every country in the world is now expected to fall in line with his international health regulations because of hantavirus. He says it is now a moral obligation for nations to submit to and believe in his global health order. It's only when we support each other that we can respond more effectively to viruses and outbreaks. Countries are expected to cooperate based on international health regulations, end quote. One of the biggest things that came out of COVID wasn't even the lockdowns themselves. It was the way the entire vaccine approval system changed afterward. Most people never paid attention to the WHO's EUL system, the emergency use listing process, because it was buried under all the fear and nonstop media coverage at the time. But that emergency framework opened the door for vaccines and medical products to move through much faster under global emergency declarations, instead of years of normal review timelines. Everything shifted into this accelerated model where products could be rolled out while more data was still being gathered in real time. And once governments and global health agencies got the public used to that system during COVID, it became part of the new normal, sitting quietly in the background waiting for the next outbreak scare. Now, as hantavirus headlines start spreading everywhere, suddenly vaccine development is already being talked about again under the same kind of emergency use listing infrastructure, okay? The same one that was built back during COVID. Crazy that back in 2021, on Bill Gates' own website, it writes, the next pandemic, hantavirus, spread from rodents to humans. Old and new world hantavirus has become endemic in many continents, but are sporadic cases of person-to-person transmission strong enough evidence to fear its pandemic potential? People, this was written back in 2021, and it seems like this big hantavirus scare is being used so that big pharma companies can collect more of that government bread, aka your tax money, for more of their toxic shots. Look at this title right here. Hantavirus scientists were close to vaccine, but ran out of money. Really? See what happens when you don't give them all your money? We're supposed to believe that. If only they had more money, okay? We need more mRNA shots, damn it. From COVID to now. People are noticing the same infrastructure is already sitting there ready to go the second another outbreak hits headlines. Emergency approvals, fast-track products, non-stop media fear, and billions flowing right back into pharmaceutical companies all over again. I can't believe some of the headlines I've been seeing here. Cleaning out the shed or cottage for spring? Here's how to protect yourself from hantavirus. So now just coming into contact with any mouse makes us susceptible to catching the virus, okay? Can't even clean out your shed without catching the scam Hebrew virus. This is what liberals look like on their way to get the hantavirus vaccine. Just sprinting as fast as they can to the nearest death shot spot. Funny enough, there was actually an X-Files episode back in 1998 involving hantavirus. In the episode, a character tells Mulder that the hantavirus outbreak was supposedly being used as a cover story for something much darker underneath. The show claimed elites and government agencies were hiding an extraterrestrial infection called black oil, while the public was told it was just a hantavirus outbreak. FEMA was involved, people were being quarantined, and the virus itself was tied to alien colonization experiments and covert government operations happening behind closed doors. Interesting though, right? Because in reality, the black oil is the graphene in those COVID shots, responding to EMF waves, So they really did do the predictive programming quite accurately. Governments want us to believe it's COVID or hantavirus when it's those brain scramblers on every corner. That's what makes all this so crazy, because after decades of treating UFOs like a joke, governments suddenly change their tune. Now we have congressional hearings, Pentagon footage, military officials openly discussing unidentified craft, declassified files being dumped publicly, piece by piece, like the public is being slowly walked into something, clearly all coordinated. Why now, though? Obama himself said aliens are real just recently. Why didn't he release the files when he was in office? Because right as UFO disclosure suddenly becomes mainstream, society is also building the largest AI infrastructure in human history. Massive data centers going up everywhere. Governments openly discussing biometric tracking, predictive policing, satellite monitoring, and digital IDs, even autonomous drones. You've seen some of this footage. Unbelievable stuff that's coming. AI systems capable of analyzing human behavior in real time. Interesting theory, too, is that these giant data centers aren't really just for cloud storage and AI chatbots, but the foundation of a modern digital prison. A society where everything becomes monitored, tracked, predicted, and analyzed constantly through AI systems. And it's crazy the amount of power these facilities are consuming. It's getting insane. There's a story out right now coming out of Lake Tahoe, that region where tens of thousands of residents are being told their electrical supplier plans to stop servicing them, while huge amounts of energy are being redirected toward expanding AI data centers in Nevada. Around 49,000 people could reportedly be affected. Nevada's power grid was already estimated to be using roughly 22% of its electricity capacity just for data centers in 2024, and projections are saying it could climb to 35% by 2030. If this expansion continues, think about how insane that sounds for a second, okay? Entire communities potentially dealing with energy instability while giant AI server campuses keep multiplying nonstop, consuming absurd amounts of electricity just to feed these expanding systems. Then you've got BlackRock CEO Larry Fink openly talking about protecting AI infrastructure from domestic threats. Okay, so if there's any uprising against these data centers, he wants you labeled a domestic terrorist. And cheap drones, he says, suggesting future facilities may need to be built underground because people could be using drones to attack them. And honestly, listen carefully to the way these people talk because they're basically admitting they already expect public backlash. Why? Because these giant AI data centers are consuming unbelievable amounts of land, water, electricity, and resources while ordinary people get stuck with rising power costs, strained infrastructure, and entire communities being reshaped around server compounds nobody voted for.
Let me also, though, bring back the whole notion of what's going on in the Middle East, where there's going to be huge opportunities there. But now, because of drone warfare, we have to relook at all forms of security and the need for rebuilding the GCC region to rebuild it so that it's going to be in a position where it's not going to be obstructed by drone warfare. So many more things are going to have to be underground. But even here in the United States, if we're going to be building, let's say, these 1 gigawatt data centers, how do we make sure we're not protecting those $50 billion, $75 billion investments? We have to relook at everything because of the role of drone warfare. Right now we're looking at it internationally, but one of my concerns is, could it be a domestic terrorism using a $3,000 drone? So all of these things are actually opportunities, not problems. It's going to require, as we said, trillions of dollars of capital. Governments cannot build these out alone. They don't have the wherewithal. And two, their deficits are started mounting. And we spend too little time talking about the U.S. deficits and other countries' deficits. So this is all going to be the role of private sector.
Fink openly admitted that private firms like BlackRock and its institutional partners will effectively control huge portions of the AI infrastructure being built across America because the government supposedly can't afford to fund it itself. Think about how insane that really is. The backbone of the future AI economy, surveillance systems, military systems, increasingly falling under the control of massive financial corporations instead of the public itself. BlackRock wants to own all of this. Are you surprised? Then comes the creepiest part here. He starts talking about domestic terrorism involving cheap $3,000 drones and says security systems will need to be completely rethought with many facilities potentially going underground. Like they already know society is heading towards massive tension around these projects, for a reason. Weren't there just a bunch of drones stolen in New Jersey? $1,000 drones? I wonder what they're planning soon. Maybe some false flag attack on the data centers, and then they're going to call anyone that wants to speak up against them domestic terrorists. And once you start connecting the dots, it becomes obvious, okay? Why would you need underground fortified AI infrastructure protected like military installations unless these systems are becoming something far bigger than simple data storage? The timing just exposes it all. I mean, just 1 week after Trump rolled out a new counterterrorism strategy, expanding the definition of extremist threats and putting more focus on domestic groups, Larry Fink suddenly starts talking about uprisings against AI infrastructure and domestic terrorism connected to drones. So people naturally start wondering where all this is heading. UFO disclosure suddenly becomes mainstream. AI infrastructure expands everywhere. Massive surveillance systems get normalized. Then resistance to these systems starts being framed as potential extremism or terrorism. And that's where this starts tying directly back to the UFO disclosure angle, because right as governments normalize unidentified aerial threats, fear around drones, AI surveillance expansion, the largest data infrastructure buildup in human history is happening simultaneously behind the scenes. That's where the psychological angle starts getting really interesting, because once populations accept the idea that there may be unidentified threats operating beyond normal understanding, UFOs, flying saucers, people also become far more willing to accept expanded surveillance, militarization, and centralized control in the name of security. Once you start digging through the actual UFO files themselves, because I did, it gets even darker. Hey, look over there. That's right. The Trump administration just dropped the UFO files. And what did all of these pages and documents show? Well, absolutely nothing, of course. They don't prove aliens exist or even UFOs for that matter. Clearly a distraction from something much bigger going on. But after going through the files, there are some hidden things in here that I have to go through, because they are very interesting and they have nothing to do with flying saucers. Buried inside all the UFO reports and the random radar sightings that could be anything, and people writing letters to the FBI asking if aliens are real, those were in the documents. I mean, flooded with these letters here. Inside all that noise, there's suddenly this classified secret memo connected to a man named W.R. Hanawalt that takes a hard turn into psychological warfare, nervous system manipulation, remote monitoring, and what basically sounds like early MK Ultra nightmare fuel. Now, this wasn't just somebody claiming they saw lights over a farm somewhere. The document starts talking about alleged technologies capable of influencing the human mind, triggering emotional breakdowns, remotely monitoring thoughts, and manipulating people through advanced systems supposedly tied to identified flying objects, and secret military research going back to the 1940s. And remember the timing here. This is 1967. The public still had no idea how deep intelligence agencies already were into psychological experimentation. MK Ultra was still hidden from the world back then. The CIA was actively running programs involving LSD, hypnosis, sensory deprivation, trauma experiments, and behavioral conditioning, pretending none of it existed. COINTELPRO was already underway too. Intelligence agencies were experimenting with surveillance and social engineering during the height of the Cold War, while the public was completely in the dark about it. So when people today read this memo and see references to thoughts being monitored, nervous systems being manipulated, and emotional collapse being triggered remotely, and even claims about surveillance systems connected to aircraft, satellites, trucks, and even what the document calls artificial moons. So it's easy to see why people connect these old files to the secret experiments governments later admitted were real. The creepy part is how modern some of it suddenly sounds. Back when people would have laughed at the idea that governments could monitor communications globally through satellites, track behavior digitally, or manipulate public emotions through mass media and social platforms, then people start finding out, these patents from Rockefeller University discussing ferritin nanoparticles being remotely stimulated through radio frequency signals to activate cellular responses inside the body. Add that beside modern AI surveillance systems and brain interface technology, and suddenly those things we saw in the UFO files don't sound nearly as crazy to people anymore. They were discussing that decades ago, and it's interesting they buried that in UFO files. Most of the file reads more like the Bureau archiving allegations and strange reports rather than validating them, but in many ways that almost makes it more creepy in a way, because it shows the FBI was still preserving and classifying material involving mind control allegations during the exact same time period we now know intelligence agencies really were secretly experimenting on people behind closed doors. And layer this on top too, the claims about unidentified flying objects existing since 1945, advanced military craft, and rumors of recovered technology from the post-war era, that feeds directly into decades of speculation surrounding black projects and hidden aerospace programs. And this is what's actually fascinating about these UFO releases overall. The UFO itself becomes secondary. The deeper rabbit hole is the psychological side of it all. You start realizing that these files sit right in the middle of military secrecy, Cold War paranoia, propaganda, surveillance, and psychological experimentation. Same themes we're still dealing with now. Governments claiming transparency while still withholding information. Intelligence agencies studying behavior and influence. The media publicly mocking witnesses while quietly reporting on classified investigations in the background. Congress demanding answers while agencies stall for years. And now in 2026, they suddenly start dumping these files publicly after years of hearings, whistleblower testimony, and Pentagon disclosures, all while AI surveillance systems, biometric tracking, and predictive policing, neural interface technology are openly being developed right now in front of the public. So when people read these old files and see references to nervous system manipulation, the reason it hits differently today is because the modern world has all of those things people once thought were science fiction. One of the strangest things buried in these newly released UFO files isn't even the sightings themselves. It's the handwritten letters being mailed directly to the FBI by ordinary Americans during the late 1940s. Right after stuff like the Manhattan Project took place and people began realizing, wait, hold up, the government is hiding massive secret projects from the public? One woman in particular stands out because her letter sounds like the blueprint for conspiracies that came true decades later, okay? In the letter sent to Hoover, she starts talking about flying saucers being connected to hidden powers operating in secrecy, advanced technology the public doesn't understand, and then suddenly she references Antarctica as some kind of hidden headquarters tied to this phenomenon. And remember, again, this is 1948. World War II had just ended. The Manhattan Project had already proven governments do secret projects behind the scenes. Nazi scientists were being brought into American aerospace and intelligence programs through Operation Paperclip. Jets, rockets, radar systems, and experimental aircraft were advancing rapidly. Then suddenly newspapers across America start reporting mysterious flying discs moving through the sky at impossible speeds. People genuinely didn't know what they were looking at anymore. Some believed it was Soviet tech, others thought it was secret American military craft. Some thought it was just something weird, something stranger, pointing up and saying aliens, but I don't think that's the case now, especially after going through these files. And that's where Antarctica became important psychologically. It was isolated, frozen, mysterious, and mostly inaccessible to the average person. The perfect place for hidden operations taking place, underground bases or advanced technology being concealed away from the public. What's fascinating is this woman was already connecting those ideas together almost 80 years ago, long before internet conspiracy culture even existed. Even back then, people were already starting to believe there were hidden layers of power and technology operating behind the scenes that the public wasn't being told about. Now, that being said, I have to get into this one. Not sure how true or accurate it is, but it's super interesting nonetheless. Because once you start digging into these newly released FBI files, you realize the Antarctica theories didn't just randomly appear out of nowhere decades later. And that's where the Nazi Antarctica rabbit hole starts feeding directly into all of this. I gotta say, it's super, super interesting. Because unlike a lot of conspiracy theories, part of the foundation here is actual real history. Nazi Germany genuinely conducted expeditions into Antarctica before World War II in a region they called Neuschwabenland. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, or New Swabia. And Nazi Germany also had some of the most advanced aerospace technology on Earth during the war. Jets, rocket programs, flying wing aircraft, guided missiles, and some reports show some saucers too. I don't know if Nazis were working on flying saucers, but I have seen some cool pictures of that. So after Germany collapsed, rumors started spreading that parts of these secret research projects may have survived somewhere hidden from the rest of the world. Then things got even stranger in 1946 when the United States launched Operation Highjump, one of the largest military expeditions ever sent to Antarctica. Thousands of personnel, warships, aircraft carriers, even submarines, full military support. Officially, it was just a training and research mission, but people questioned why such a massive military operation was needed in one of the most remote places on Earth right after World War II ended. Now, this is where the Antarctica rabbit hole goes completely off the rails, okay? Super interesting, I gotta say, because over the years, the Admiral Byrd story evolved into claims that during Operation Highjump in 1946 and 1947, Byrd and parts of the U.S. military supposedly encountered something deep and crazy in Antarctica that completely changed how they viewed the region. According to the more extreme versions of the story, Byrd allegedly flew over areas that should have been nothing but endless ice and instead reported seeing ice-free valleys, rivers, forest, vegetation, and even animals. One of the most famous alleged excerpts describes his instruments malfunctioning as he crossed over a mountain range before suddenly seeing what looked to be a warm green region below him. The story claims he reported forests growing along mountain slopes, strange terrain where there should have been only snow and ice, and navigation systems spinning uncontrollably. And then it gets even crazier. Some versions claim Byrd's aircraft was intercepted by advanced disc-shaped flying craft capable of impossible speeds and maneuvers. Others say these crafts escorted him into an underground hidden civilization beneath Antarctica, where he allegedly encountered highly advanced beings warning humanity about global destruction after World War II. Some stories describe these beings as tall, pale humanoids. Others claim they were Nordic-looking entities or descendants of an ancient hidden civilization living beneath the ice for centuries. Then, of course, the Nazi angle gets tied directly into this because once people learned Germany had actually conducted real Antarctic expeditions before World War II into Neuschwabenland, conspiracy theories exploded claiming the Nazis may have discovered these hidden regions first and established secret underground facilities there. Over time, this spiraled into stories about Base 211, alleged underground Nazi fortresses hidden beneath the Antarctic ice where advanced experimental aircraft and disc-shaped vehicles were supposedly developed after the war. Then people started connecting Operation Paperclip into the story, believing Nazi aerospace scientists brought into the United States may have already known about advanced propulsion systems connected to these Antarctic discoveries. And this is where the famous Byrd quote starts getting pulled into the scene here. After Operation Highjump, Byrd reportedly warned the future wars could involve aircraft capable of flying from pole to pole at incredible speeds. That line alone fueled decades of speculation because people started asking themselves, what exactly did he see down there that made him issue a warning like that right after the war ended? Then the theories spiraled even further into stories about underground tunnel systems beneath Antarctica, hidden geothermal regions warmed by volcanic activity, massive cave entrances visible from satellite imagery, and secret military no-fly zones. Some theories even claim UFO sightings exploded after World War II because advanced Nazi disc technology survived the war in hidden Antarctica bases, and continued operating in secret while governments quietly covered it up during the Cold War. Now, I'm not sure if any of this is true, but you know how much I love alien stories, especially cool Nazi-connected UFO alien stories, so I gotta get into this. A huge amount of this comes from Admiral Byrd's own testimonies. And what makes it fascinating is seeing these newly released FBI UFO files proving people were already connecting Antarctica and hidden technology, flying discs, and secret world powers all together back in the late 1940s. As I went over that woman's letter, her name was Marion Butcher, and she went off about cities, secret civilizations there, and even referenced a place called Rainbow City, Antarctica. Super interesting stuff. And then fast forward a couple decades, where are we now? And now here we are in 2026 with headlines suddenly talking about thousands of identified objects being spotted near American coastlines and unexplained underwater activity being tracked near major shipping routes. Witnesses describe objects moving through the ocean at extreme speeds, entering and leaving the water, and appearing near military areas. Maybe there's a simple explanation for it, I don't know, but maybe there isn't. But maybe people are noticing the timing too because they're spotted on the coasts of the US. And these stories are coming out the same time mysterious illnesses are popping up on cruise ships at the exact same time. The same time, governments and tech companies are openly building systems designed to monitor populations. I don't know, make the connections yourselves, people, but it's getting crazy out here. And that's where I'm going to leave it, folks. If you like what I do here, if you want to support this show, it is greatly appreciated if you hit those links in the description. Please consider subscribing to my Patreon or a Subscribe Star. I need your help more than ever right now, so click those links in the description, folks. One-time donations greatly appreciated. Patreon or a Subscribe Star, purchase the Eyes Wide Open coffee, or send me crypto. Crypto wallets are in the description, folks. Until next week, until next time, this is Steve Eyes. You're on the Eyes is Watching channel, signing off.